I thought I'd do another, I thought I'd do another little video this afternoon talking about a wrestler whose death had a huge impact on me as a wrestling fan. Without, if I had to say, which wrestler whose death had the biggest impact on me, I would say Bray Wyatt. I remember it was obviously go back to 2023, 24th August. It was a Thursday, and obviously I just finished work for the week. Like, I was getting ready to sort of enjoy the weekend. I had a 4 day weekend to look forward to. I used to work on a Monday. I used to work on on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then I had the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday off work. So I'd come home on the Thursday. Was looking forward to enjoying my relaxation for 4 days before going back to work the following week on the Tuesday. Um, and I'd seen obviously the news the previous day that Terry Funk, ECW legend Terry Funk, had passed away. Everyone was talking about that. Everyone was talking on social media. Social media was a buzz, with tributes and everything that were coming in for him. And I watch a wrestling channel called See Wrestling, who does a lot of wrestling videos. Obviously, does things you might have missed from Raw, NXT, and SmackDown, and also from the PLEs. And later that night, it was I don't remember exactly what time it was, but it was definitely around 11:30 midnight. I saw that he'd put a video up saying Bray Wyatt has passed away, and I was like, I was like, what? I was thinking maybe I thought at first he thought maybe it was, maybe, this video, and I like the video and that now. I kind of thought maybe he was, if he meant Bray Wyatt as in character, had died or something like that. I was shocked when I think,
What?
At first I think I didn't really want to believe that the news was actually true. Although many multiple sources were reporting that information and a lot of people were talking about it, I didn't want to believe that the reports were true. I didn't want to believe that Bray Wyatt had actually passed away. I think I was really stunned, sort of lost for words. I couldn't really take it in, I couldn't really, I was struggling to sort of, I seen the news, I seen it, and I'm like, I just sat there speechless, stunned. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what to say. I was like, just absolutely stunned, by this news. This news had literally come out of nowhere, that Bray Wyatt had passed away earlier on that day. Obviously, Triple H had put a post out, I think it was on Twitter, confirming that he'd received a call from Bray Wyatt's father, not Barry, obviously at my Rotunda, confirming that Bray had obviously passed away earlier on in the day, and I was like, wow, this is a huge shock. I remember for like the following days just feeling really numb and just not knowing what to think. I couldn't really believe that he'd gone. I couldn't believe that he'd passed away. Um, it's one of those wrestling deaths that had a huge effect on me. I think there's a lot, I loved Bray Wyatt, I was always a big fan of him in WWE and all, I loved, a lot of the matches that he wrestled. Um, I always find it so hard to go back and watch the Mountain Dew Pitch Black match because obviously knowing that that was Bray Wyatt's final match in WWE, not that anyone knew that at the time. Nobody could have known at the time that we were basically watching what was Bray Wyatt's final ever match. I bet LA Knight didn't for one single second think that he would end up being Bray Wyatt's final opponent. You know, and it must be quite crazy for him knowing that he was Bray Wyatt's final opponent, So obviously we know that there were plans for him to face either Bobby Lashley or Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania. I think it was going to be, Bray versus Bobby at Mania. Unfortunately, that match didn't happen. What was crazy was that literally only about a week before this news came out that Bray had died, that Bray had passed away, there were reports suggesting that Bray was actually getting ready to make an in-ring return, and he was, that plans had been, were being put in place for the following month, obviously, which was September. Um, and then that was obviously something, kind of good news because we hadn't really heard much about Bray. He'd been off screens for a while. And then obviously we found out that he'd been dealing with obviously ill health. He had COVID, which I think exacerbated a pre-existing heart condition or lung like that he had, or a lung condition that he had. Um, and that's what unfortunately led to. He had to wear one of those those external defibrillators, and he wasn't wearing that at the time that he passed away. His wife Jojo obviously went in to check on him, and obviously found him struggling to breathe, and basically turning blue. And his external defibrillator that he was meant to be wearing was in the heart. You know, at the end of the day, like Bray Wyatt it's a bit like Brody Lee, Luke Harper. His death literally came out of nowhere. He disappeared from AEW TV. No one knew why he wasn't appearing in AEW. No one knew what the real reason was. But and then obviously we find out literally I think it was on the, I think it was on, but like the day after Boxing Day, we found out that Bray had passed away, that Luke Harper, or that Luke Harper slash Brody Lee had passed away. Um, and again, I was quite stunned by that. I was like, wow, this has come out of nowhere. And it's the same exact thing with Bray Wyatt. I think it caught a lot of people off guard because it just came out of nowhere. No one was expecting that news. No one was expecting to, because obviously we just heard the day before that Terry Funk had passed away, and now we were hearing the news that Bray Wyatt had also passed away in that same week. That was a tough week for wrestling fans to lose two huge names in 1 week. Obviously, first we lost Terry Funk, and then literally a day apart. First we lost Terry Funk, and then the next day we lost Bray Wyatt. Bray. The saddest thing is that obviously Bray Wyatt was only 36 years old, and I have said before in previous videos that wrestlers dying at a young age sadly is an uncommon thing. Sadly, that has been quite a common thing. There are, loads of wrestlers who have unfortunately passed away at a relatively young age. There's been a lot of wrestlers that have passed away before they've even hit their 60s. And obviously recently we saw Sabu passed away. Obviously the news that Sabu had passed away at the age of 60. Obviously that news broke a couple of weeks ago. Obviously that, but for me, yeah, Bray Wyatt's death, it knocked me for six a little bit. Like, I didn't, I was just so stunned. Like, I struggled to really, like, the day out, like, the following day, I was just so, I had got a bit emotional, I'm not gonna lie, I had to get a bit emotional thinking, I couldn't believe it, I don't think anybody could. Watching that episode of SmackDown that night was so hard. It was like such a tough episode to watch. Um, I was watching the Wrestling Days live stream that he did for that episode of SmackDown. Just by watching, the live streams, watching different YouTube videos, reading the comments on those videos, reading the comments on Facebook, on Twitter, you could see just how devastated and heartbroken and stunned, people actually were, by this news that Bray had passed away. I don't think anybody, has really come to terms with that, or has really, I think a lot of people struggled to process that news that Bray Wyatt obviously Bray Wyatt had passed away. Um, it was just incredibly sad. And one of the toughest, one of the saddest, it's one of the wrestling deaths that's probably had the biggest impact on me, like literally. I don't think there's a wrestler whose death has had more of an impact on me than Bray Wyatt's passing did. I was just left absolutely gobsmacked by this news that he'd passed away. I couldn't believe it, literally did not believe it. I was like, no, this isn't real. This can't be real. Surely not, surely not Bray. Like, of all people, why Bray? Surely he can't actually be dead. And I didn't want to, for a few days or so, I didn't want to believe the news was real. I didn't want to believe that we were never going to see Bray Wyatt on TV again. That's why I couldn't believe. That's why I couldn't really get my head around. It was the fact that we were never going to see him on TV again. It didn't feel real. It was like so surreal knowing that someone that, a wrestler that so many people loved and adored had passed away, But I'm grateful for the I as a wrestling fan will always be so grateful for the big moments that Bray Wyatt gave us and the memories he gave us, and the great matches that he had in WWE. I've always said that I hated Vince McMahon for the fact that he released Bray Wyatt. I think he made a big mistake there, and I think that, I do appreciate the fact that Triple H made that decision to bring him back to WWE. I think that was the right thing to do. And that was one thing that Triple H actually did get right, was bringing Bray Wyatt back. It's just sad because, obviously, who knows what Bray Wyatt would have done on what the next couple of years would have looked like for Bray had he not passed away. But yeah, Bray Wyatt is someone who definitely will never ever be forgotten. He will be remembered by all of us, by us all forever. We will forever, continue to remember him, obviously on his birthdays, on the anniversary, which is the 24th of August. This year, obviously, marking 2 years since he passed away. And even that feels crazy to say that, we're only a few months off of celebrating the second anniversary of Bray Wyatt's passing. It's like, blimey, how's it nearly been 2 years now since he passed away? Like, doesn't feel like it's been that long. It still feels like it was only yesterday that the news was announced that he'd passed away. And sometimes I do still get, a little bit emotional from time to time when I go back and watch Bray's matches, or I talk about, when I talk about Bray, or I see other people talking about Bray. It does get me a bit emotional because, I as a wrestling fan absolutely loved Bray Wyatt, and that it's fair to say there'll never be another one like him. There will never be another one who was able to portray a character as great as he was. But I think it's pretty fair to say that none of us will ever forget Bray. We will always remember him forever. Forever. We expect. I just hope he knows how much we as wrestling fans loved and appreciated him. I hope he knows just how much he was adored by not only by us as wrestling fans, but also by his family. As they've lost much more, his family have lost a husband, a father, a son, a brother, a grandson, and that's the saddest part about it is, we mourn a great wrestler and mourn someone, and an absolutely wonderful human being. But his family are, mourning the loss of a father, will always be mourning the loss of a father, a husband, a brother, grandfather, son, grandson, and a son. He meant some, and obviously I know that, I'm sure wherever he is up there, he's having a great time up there with Brody, that's for sure. I bet him and Brody Lee are having a great time up there together, really. I mean, it's just crazy to when you look at the Wyatts, I mean, the Wyatt family, and think like two of the members of the Wyatt family have now passed away. And then both of them, even both of them at a young age as well. Like even Brody Lee wasn't that old when he passed away. Like, I mean, Brody Lee was what? How old was he when he passed away? I can't remember. Let me have a look. Brody Lee. Uh, Brody Lee was. Uh, 41. Bray Wyatt to Brody, John Huber, Brody Lee Harper was only 41 when he passed away, so again, not relatively old. I mean, obviously, yeah, I think, a lot of wrestling deaths, that were very, very sad. I think Ultimate Warrior as well. But, I mean, yeah, although I've always said that, Ultimate Warrior's death was quite eerie, the fact that he appeared on Raw the night before he died, talking about how a man's heart every man's heart one day beats its final beat, and how every man's lungs one day breathe their final breath, like, that was just incredibly eerie, you know. And then, to think about the fact that he said that, and then the following night he died of an heart attack, like, very, very weird, very, very weird, that, very coincidental. But, Bray Wyatt, definitely the wrestler whose death had the biggest impact on me for sure. So I hope you enjoyed this video anyway. I'll see you for another one soon. Bye.